Hi, and a warm welcome for our second edition of the How To Around Conflict with Kim Best. Welcome back, Kim. So excited to have you here.
So excited to be here again. Thank you very much.
Yes, and for those of you who have missed the first part, make sure you go back and check it out, even if you just skim it to get a little bit around the thoughts where we explored the transformative power of reframing conflict as opportunities. Kim really emphasized that conflicts are not about people causing problems in that podcast, but instead, rather, it's about looking at puzzles and them wanting to be solved. And basically, this shift in the perspective, Kim identifies and believes that it opens up new paths to harmony, growth, and successful outcomes. So I'd like to reintroduce Kim again to our subscribership. She is a highly accomplished mediator and the owner of Best Conflict Solutions, LLC. She has extensive specialties in health and elder care mediation, civil and business mediation, and personal and organizational conflict coaching and conflict consulting. Welcome back.
It is good to be here. Thank you so much.
No worries, no worries. So diving right in, when we're thinking about conflict and that whole concept about it being a puzzle to solve, start helping us to unpack or walk through the how-to around to kind of switch that conflict mindset into more of a conflict resolution mindset.
Yeah, so it's normal to be in disagreement. We're going to disagree because we're different human beings with different biologies and different ideas, and that's okay. What happens, one of my favorite definitions of conflict is a place where we're stuck. And if we keep insisting that something is our way, we're going to stay stuck. So the puzzle part of it is, okay, we're stuck. What can we do to get unstuck? How do we fit together your idea and my idea, or your difference and my idea, or my difference? It's what is the problem here that's making us stuck? And I think I talked about the people aren't the problem, right? So in all forms of conflict, even in workplace, we make the person the problem. And you can't solve for people, but if you identify what is the problem, what is the need here, then you work together to solve that.
And what I'm hearing is that we're coming together to arrive at the same goal, essentially. It may not be in the same way, may not be the same thought process, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, from a workplace setting perspective anyways, even personal, I think this could be applied to, that you're looking to accomplish the same thing as an end goal.
Yeah, that's my favorite part about working in conflict, is if we learn to do it in one area, the same skills work in other areas too, because we're dealing with people. And people are the most complex part of an organization, because it's not like they're widgets that you can just, fix a little bit. People are complicated. So we actually really can benefit from having systems that help us work through those complications to have outcomes that work for everyone.
You said something really interesting there, systems. Can you break that down for me a little bit further? What do you mean by systems in identifying conflict?
Right. So there's not a one thing fits, but designing, I call mediation and the conflict process. People ask me all the time, why this instead of, say, counseling? And I say it's a systems design approach. What can we put into place that will help us deal with this? It's identifying needs, it's identifying what outcome both people want, and then it's identifying and trying to figure out how to get to that space.
Absolutely, absolutely. And based on your experiences, because I mean, to the wider audience, Kim has, lenses in multiple venues when it comes to conflict. So, from, a professional speaker, from working in and on businesses, as well as individuals, there's kind of that triad side of things. When you're starting to look at the multiple landscapes of conflict, what do you feel is one of the biggest trends kind of in today's day and age? Because it's a large topic that everybody wants to hear about.
So is this a positive trend or a negative trend that you're asking?
I enjoy your clarifying questions. It can go either way.
Yeah, right. That's my job, to ask clarifying questions. I mean, on the positive end, I think it's that we're finally starting to talk about conflict. There are a couple things that we just deny exists. I mean, conflict has a bad name, and it's not by definition a bad thing. It's just an area of disagreement, a place where we're stuck. But because we don't have the tools to handle it well, it's a lot heavier than it needs to be. So I think the fact that we can say the word conflict now and have the discussions is very helpful. On the negative end, we're trending to a whole lot of things around blame,
Yes.
Intolerance, the kind of culture of just boundaries, or because boundaries can be walls, and I don't want to get into a boundary discussion, but for a lot of people, their boundaries are a place that is a wall that you can't move past, which makes it difficult to resolve something. So our less ability to interact in a positive way, I think, it has made it a little more difficult. But that's also the thing that's bringing people to the table to talk about it too. So I'm so grateful that now we can have conversations, because if we can bring this to light and learn skills for it, it's not going to be such a big problem anymore.
Yeah, I tend to agree in that. And I've been looking upwards because I've been thinking as you're talking, and I can't help but have my own personal bias kind of come into play, where many of the root causes comes down to often what we think is communication breakdowns, but in actuality, it's leaning into our emotional intelligence skill sets. And so I want you to debate or debunk with me in this, because in hearing you speak about all these things, where my mind's going is, oh, wow, we have an opportunity to have more emotional understanding, awareness, and regulation prior to having intentional conversations. Because often what happens when you say things like blame and heavy boundaries, I guess, using my own words, what I'm hearing is that it's still emotionally charged. That individual hasn't kind of sorted out what they need in kind of encapsulating what you had said earlier around really figuring out your needs, your wants, motivations, and general outcomes. Before you can get to that point, I strongly feel that you have to get out of your emotional brain to get into your problem solving or your innovative brain.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well said. Some words popped into my head as I was listening to you. One was protective. So we get in a protective mode when we do the things that you described, having boundaries that are walls, and we cannot function collaboratively in that space. So I think the other thing is safety. We can have discussions when we know that the fallback from that is not going to be atomic. And we also have to be willing to have those discussions regardless of what the fallback is, trusting ourselves to be in that place that you talked about, where someone can have a reaction because we get triggered. And it's like, okay, now's not a good time to talk about this. Let's revisit it when we're in a place where we can. So I like thinking of a lot of these conflict conversations is planting seeds. Okay, we need to have a conversation. Don't spring it on somebody, number one. It's like you don't walk up and say, hey, your work real today was really just awful. You're not going to get a, well, let's sit down and talk about that. So you can set it. I'm constantly trying to find ways to set people up for success. And if you think of that first, okay, I have a problem. How can I set myself and the other person best up for success? Because we're very busy setting ourselves up for success. But if we don't stand in the other person's shoes, we're going to put our best fight for ourselves and wonder why it wasn't well received. Now, I got to say, not as a sales pitch, but in all truth, because even in my own life, that's where it's great to have a third party person, whether you have your own mediation system, someone who can be a neutral in that space, because when it's us in the conflict, it's us that the dinosaur's eating,
Yes.
So I think it's something we all need help with, because our biologies, our reactions are so much stronger than, our better self.
Absolutely. And what I'm hearing is there's a two-prong approach, essentially, in that from an individualistic perspective, we all, regardless of what journey or stage or elevation of our journey are on, have an opportunity to really engage and continue the self-awareness focus and self-regulation and management and how we're reacting to things. The other piece that I'm hearing is having the proper resources or structures in place to have those puzzle fitting conversations. And the other thing that was coming up for me previously in what you were saying, Kim, is that it really makes sense for individuals to understand two things. Systemically in the workplace, we've often have allowed judgment to creep in so that we don't have to have those hard conversations.
Right.
Because as humans, we're, to your point around biology, we're built in the sense that we're going to go to the negative first. And it takes work to stay in a place of being humbled or joy, that fulfilling feeling side of things. And what I really thoroughly enjoyed about what you had said was that it breeds the opportunity for us to look at our workplace structures as is. Because right now, there's still that separation of personal and professional. And to me, it comes down to that whole person performance, which means that psychological safety and other definitions really need to include our own characteristics and who we are. Because oftentimes it's not comfortable all the way up to even being okay, allowed, or accepted to have personal expression. So what, by way of, if my behaviors give you an inkling of my character, then automatically judgment comes into play because it may not be in alignment with that other person's values or belief system. And I think that's a huge problem in the workplace because it makes things more complex and sticky than they need to be if we were really teaching our leaders, regardless of where they're at in their tenure, that judgment doesn't have a place, in that we ought to be curious first, within context, of course.
You said so much. I mean, it was fantastic because you could actually do an hour on each section that you just said.
Fair.
Because even to talk about the expectations that we have that other people should respond how we do, or should think, that's the big one, right? Like to go around the shoulds. I mean, the shoulds in itself is a judgment. And I recently talked to a SHRM group and I was talking about shoulds. So shoulds is when we think our way is the right way and the only way.
Yes.
Right. And the odds of other people thinking that are slim to none. So that's in the setting people up to win department. That's a strikeout. And there is no evidence to say that they should do that. It's just we would be more comfortable and probably feel more affirmed in our choice. So one of the things we have to do is respect our own self as an individual. This is our truth. This is my truth, but it's not your truth. This is how I handle something, but it's okay that it's not how you handle. And that is eliminating the judgment, exactly like you said.
Yeah, definitely. And bringing the operational, why does this matter, into play, help us understand, for the more tactical thinkers or individuals that want to win from a bottom line perspective, how much does conflict impact us at work, in your experience?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, in the terms of so if you have a negative, toxic workplace, you have decreased morale, you have decreased productivity, you have decreased retention. 50% of people leave their workplace because of conflict.
Yeah.
Conflict escalates if it's not addressed. It goes from bad to worse.
Right.
And we all grow personally and professionally when we learn how to handle conflict. So it's just, money is wasted on litigation. Money is wasted on time missed from work. You and I were talking earlier about how HR professionals spend, maybe 3 hours a day, a work day, on managing conflict, which is keeping them from doing other things. And you probably know it's an old study, but it's still the standard one, where it's like how many billion, like $35 billion, because each person working is spending a certain number of hours per week in conflict
Yes,
that's decreased productivity for them. So I don't
that makes
remember what the
sense.
number is, but it's a very big number that's just lost because of wasted time in workplace. So
Absolutely.
you know, yeah, there's no joy. I mean, for me, the biggest reason is this is a big piece of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Mm-hmm.
all want to live that life as fully as we can, as purposefully as we can, having the satisfaction that we want out of it. And while you mentioned before that not dealing with conflict is easier, it is easier on the front end.
Yes,
But on the back end, you're building things that all the negativity that just grows and builds. On
agreed.
the back end, it's so much harder. So
Mm-hmm.
I never say that it's easy to work through these things, but good stuff
Fair.
isn't easy. But it gets you to a place where it's easier. And I do say that it's far easier than not learning it, the price you pay for not learning it. Because as
Absolutely.
people, we're going to run out of people to work for us. We're going to run out of people to work with us. We run out of people to stay in relationship with us because we've fired all the people in our lives. You know, there
Mm-hmm.
are consequences that are so much greater for not dealing with conflict than what happens when you do.
Absolutely. And equating it to our HR professionals when we're thinking about it from a turnover perspective, oftentimes I think it's advantageous to look at our exit interviews and understand what is a reason for them leaving. And if you see a trend that, not a job fits, conflict with management, et cetera, there's a whole kind of host of reasons that tie back to this, then that's a business case on itself that management and leadership really needs to take the accountability to be able to pivot when it comes to the culture around conflict.
You know what I think? That's again well said. But what I think one of the simplest ways to mitigate for conflict
Mm,
is to ask questions and listen. You
yes,
know,
taking it
so
back to the roots.
taking it back to the roots. I have found in most workplaces that have elevated conflict that really almost every single time for me, and I'm sorry, managers, the managers are coming from a place where they're figuring out in best intentions what their employees need.
Mm-hmm,
And so they're making policies, they're making changes, and in their heads, this is better for everybody. But
mm-hmm.
they're not asking them. So it's maybe not better, and it's often not better. And even if it is, nobody likes to do something because someone else told them, especially us adults, right? We want autonomy, we
Mm-hmm.
want voice. So getting to know your people, getting to talk to people, making an opportunity to have a conversation even outside of work. Because the other thing that just blows me away is we can work with people for years and not know anything about them,
Mm-hmm.
nothing about them.
Mm-hmm.
And we can go to school with people for long periods of time and know nothing about them. So making opportunities to learn who people are and know their story, because what you mentioned earlier about how we see a picture of someone and we make that the whole person. We have an experience with someone that's not great and they're a difficult person.
Mm-hmm.
Keep in the back of your mind that we all have those moments, and it's
Yes.
not the whole person. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like none of us want to be judged. That's the attribution, fundamental attribution error, right? Like if we mess up, hey, it was a mistake and everybody makes mistakes. If other people mess up, they have a character flaw
Mm-hmm.
and we can't trust them or they're not on our side and all these things. So just thinking about if these things we're telling ourselves is true, like, oh boy, that's a nasty person, walk away and say, is that true?
Mm-hmm.
Because I love the phrase for now. That's where that person is for now,
You had
you
mentioned
know?
that before, and it makes total sense.
Yeah. Nobody's always in whatever moment we're in, you know, we're all more than that. Not to say you'll get along with everyone. I mean, everybody's not going to be your best friend, and that's okay. But there
Mm-hmm.
is no reason not to have a respectful conversation or respectful relationship with everybody we encounter.
Absolutely. And so a few things are coming up for me. I think primarily is getting curious around how do you change a culture or the way that we're speaking to our team members from a leadership standpoint if that's not something that's normally done within the organization? Like, how do you go from square one to being able to have, thorough, autonomous, in-depth conversations that are solving problems?
So the number one way, I can't think of another way that might be. I mean, reading Harvard Business Review and stuff is always very helpful, but the number one way is training. I mean, these are skills we haven't learned. How are we going to do it better if we don't know how to do it? It's
Absolutely.
a toolbox, and the more tools we have in our toolbox. So tool A didn't work. It worked last week, but it's not working now. Well, there's a different need, a different time. What else do I have to do that, to bring into that? And then it's knowing what your goal is. If my goal is to understand you, if my goal is to design a better way forward with you, if my goal is to work in harmony beside you, then I know what I need to find in my toolbox to help contribute to that. And you have say in that too, by the way. It's not up to me to decide how to get along with you better entirely. It's up to me to learn from you what that would be like for you.
To me, in its simplest form, I feel like, again, there's two streams. There's the individual's work. So what are my goals and growth? What are my blind spots and conflict? How do I understand my own feelings so that I can come to a place of respectful conversation and maintain that? Because often we can start off really good, but then we're triggered and it can escalate. So that's a sidebar conversation. The other stream that I'm hearing is, when you say tools in your tool belt, there's different methodologies. I think what I'm hearing, Kim, is there's different methodologies around conflict so that you can digest it in a repeatable, systematic approach, in that you may not use it the same way for every single environment, context, and person, but basically the principles you have kind of down pat so that you can pull those tools out when you need them, whenever you need them.
We have something, it's called, so the whole process of mediation and facilitation and negotiation, alternative dispute resolution or dispute resolution skills. For me, there's a triad that's just perfect. That is, first, you learn about conflict. You understand where it comes from, our differences, why with the big 5 personality types, that person can never be as open and outgoing as you, but there's nothing wrong with them. They're hardwired that way. So understanding conflict, understanding triggers, and then knowing that those aren't walls, learning how, okay, that's a moment in conflict, but everything that matters isn't what got you to there. It's what you do next. And that's what we haven't learned. So learning the what next. So first, learning about conflict. Then having systems put in place, which maybe is mediation, having a third party be able to work things out, hold that space to work things out. And then the other one is facilitated dialogues. Those are not the same thing as town halls. They're structured dialogues where everybody has an opportunity to talk, and they work. But people have an opportunity to learn as well as talk. So I have to sit and listen to your story from a place of understanding, wanting to know. And those 3 in combination, I can't imagine that there's anything that wouldn't work in terms of conflict if you have those practices built into your system.
One thing that I was thinking back to my past life in HR, and oftentimes you're organically named the mediator. And what I've seen in past is it's worked very successfully. And in other circumstances, not so much. Gratefully, not so much on the latter side either. But all this to say is, what's coming up for me is, how do you ensure in the workplace that, like, the small p politics doesn't come into play when you're selecting your mediator, and ensuring that if it is someone internal, that it's set up for success for the team? What do you do there?
There is a huge risk, and I've not had anybody dispute this, even working within systems, that having an internal person is a risk. If you want someone to feel safe, that they can be honest, hire an external dispute resolution practitioner. The companies that I've done, I've had people say, if any company I'd worked before had this system, I would never have left. I mean, it works.
Mm.
Now, I want to speak to your HR position because you may have noticed I smiled real big. I feel for HR people because they're stuck in the middle.
Yes.
And most of the time, and I mean way most of the time, employees do not trust the HR person to be a confidant because the HR person reports to management. So
Yes.
most people will report you might be a nice person, but I don't trust you because you're going to sell me out at the end. What a terrible position to be in. And you shouldn't. That's not what you should be doing.
Mhm.
So, and then your last part of it, as far as the uh, office politics and stuff, you know, when you're working at whatever level, if you're management or whatever level you are, the level above you is setting the culture. So if you're working, you know, somewhere in the field and you work with a management that gossips and talks about other people, they know it. Your
Yeah.
people know it. And
Mhm.
it sets the tone for how it's
It
going to
does.
be. So again, when I go into companies and they're like, we have these problems, it's so hard to say, you know what, I see where it's coming from. Like there's a mirror here,
Mm.
which
Mm.
is why the first thing I do is have management help design what process we're going to use to address the conflict on a systemic level.
That makes total
Because
sense.
yeah,
Epiphanies can come up in there.
yes, there is an opportunity for some self-reflection. There's an opportunity. So how does this show up for you all?
Mm.
How do you think your employees are experiencing this? And again, they're creating it. I'm not walking in saying this is what you need to do. I'm
Mhm.
helping make that space for that.
Mhm.
And in the meantime, also helping them look at their employees as different, you know,
Mhm.
not something we can put a blanket policy and expect that that works for everyone, because what are we going
Absolutely.
to do about the people it misses? So it just, I think it all comes down to just humanizing things, you know, which again is respecting people at an individual level. May seem hard to do if you have a company with 10,000 people in it, but it's not, because you do
Mhm.
have managers that can reach out individually to people, and your job isn't to solve their problems.
No.
I mean, your job in HR isn't to solve their problems. It's to how can you help them solve their problem?
Yes, absolutely. And sliding forward also too, I see from the coaching side of things, again, two lanes. One being from an operational perspective, as a leader, knowing that the most powerful tool is your ability to listen, and I mean really listen.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say listen, it's at a deeper level whereby you're not distracted, you're not looking at your cell phone or the time, or fidgeting or anything like that, but rather you're hearing what they say and what they're not saying as well. And to your point, I think you said it earlier, Kim, in the sense of asking clarifying questions. I think you said that's my job to ask clarifying. It's leadership job too. It's a responsibility, I strongly feel, because that's what keeps us humble in the space of being curious or trying to understand, using your words. The other thing that was coming up for me from a leadership perspective too, as you're speaking, was around the thought process of when it comes to conflict, you can only take your team members as far as you've gone. So just like if you are setting the culture around gossip, that's the same way that you're going to set your culture around conflict. So if you have conflict, understand that you're a part of it. And apologies, because it's probably not widely accepted in the sense of an opinion, but it's true. We all have a part in this. And I
Yeah.
feel fundamentally leadership ultimately has the most accountability in being able to set the tone. Now, from a coach approach perspective, what I've seen in the past 3 to 4 years around conflict and coaching individual leaders is that oftentimes it stems from a fear within. And it's a fear of not looking a certain way, or it's a fear of
Right.
not being correct, or it's a fear of, there's a lot of changes and there was a merger or acquisition within a company. So there's a fear of structure, stature. And that's what it all boils down to. So if we're in conflict, I think as individuals, we have the responsibility to look within first. What am I afraid of? What am I afraid of losing? Et cetera, because that can humble you individually as a person to then be like, oh gosh, okay, how should I be showing up for this other person, especially if I'm in the leadership seat, right? And when I say leadership, you don't necessarily need a title to be a leader. If there's anybody dependent on you within an organization, or I should say codependent, in that they're relying on you for something within an organization. You could be a project manager, you could be an estimator. It really depends on your organizational design or setup. But regardless, we do have responsibilities in being able to look at multiple pieces. So where am I jumping off from? What type of mediation can we have in place? What resources or third party, like the Kims of the world, can we bring in to help us out with this? And come full circle, how can we influence leadership to really pay attention that we need to come together when it comes to conflict and have a safe space to be ourselves and not just our professional self.
Yeah, and that last part you said was really impactful, and I want to go just a little bit deeper in that because this is critical. So you described managers thinking they have to get it right all the time. And I think one of the biggest things that we need to model is how to handle making mistakes. Because we all want innovation, we all want progress, which means sometimes we're going to get it right and sometimes it's not going to work. And we have to be able to say that. So our fear of being wrong, and that goes back to a culture of blame and finger pointing, we have to normalize that as humans, we're not always going to get it right. It's humble. You use the word humility, which, you know, we need to demonstrate that too. So what I said to you yesterday may have stepped on your toes. I got to thinking about that. Are we good? You know, just being that honest. It's a matter of being that honest, which is so vulnerable that it's terrifying to so many people. It's also liberating. And I will say that this is life work. This isn't, oh, all of a sudden I'm going to do it. But it's a great goal to aspire to, because you are being yourself when you can do that. Not trying to look like something. I had a psych professor say to me one time that we all have bullshit detectors. And we do. Like we do. So if you're trying to show up like you're just perfect and all your ideas are great, you're not going to have anybody's respect, because that's not true. I mean, it may be wonderful to be all that, but we're not that. But what is that even modeling for your folks, that they have to be perfect too? Because that is a way to set up terrible conflict, competition between people for one-upsmanship, you know, finger pointing and blame when something does go sideways. So those things can make a huge difference in how we handle conflict. It's being real.
I enjoy where you're taking us here, Kim, in the sense of it really comes down to the simplicity of being real. And in the workplace today, I feel like more and more of that is needed now more than ever. When you're thinking about conflict, one last question for you. When you're thinking about conflict in the remote workplaces, because it's big, people are still trying to navigate even what are the proper channels of communication? How do I engage my team members in a remote workplace? And then there's the, you know, the small voice of what about conflict? So what are your thoughts now that our environment's like changing and it's becoming a faster pace based on the tools that we have in remote working?
Yeah, that's exhausting for one. Well, there's a couple ways that we're setting ourselves. It is. I mean, you're right. We don't have that break to drive to another place or to decompress. We're doing meeting after meeting after meeting. And now being able to meet with people in person, I always said Zoom was great. We still have connection. We still can read emotions. But I realize now that I really undersold what being in community in the same area. I mean, it is huge because emotions are contagious. You know, there's a different aura around being around a person that we lose doing this. Now, this is great too, but it's not perfect. So in remote, we tend to rely more on text. We tend to rely more on emails, and we tend to rely on telephone. And the words in a conversation are 20% of what's accepted in a conversation. Like our faces, our gestures, all of these things weigh more in a conversation than our words. So it's easy to misinterpret them. So check for that, watch for emails. I have more than one time had to come in on a conflict because of emails being sent that
Yes.
were misinterpreted. And nothing was meant bad by them, but it's so easy to misinterpret. So you'll have to take time to connect face to face. I try not to have phone calls and do everything on Zoom, just because I have realized how much more powerful it is to actually sit with someone. The other thing is you're going to have to create opportunities to connect on a personal level. And it won't take long. You know, there's a facilitated circle kind of thing that we recommend for schools beforehand. They're check-ins and check-outs. Take a few minutes. What's up with you? How's your family? I mean, take a minute to find out something. There's some great fun games that you can play if you're in a big group, that when we do these things, people are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this about my colleagues. And, you know, it's just having some fun. So just make sure you're building in some opportunities for connection that is not work related to.
And I think you've really nailed it, Kim, in the sense that what we crave is connection, and conflict often arises when we feel disconnected or not heard or seen.
That's right.
So I like how you're coming full circle in the sense of proactively looking at these things to not prevent conflict, because some conflict is good. Like you said earlier, it's not a bad word. It's just something that we're uncomfortable with, and it's trying to find our place or slot ourselves in the sense of where we're comfortable in conflict. And I think where I'm trying to go with this, you know, to end cap it, is conflict can be really complex, but it can be simple as well. As long as you're willing, and able to try new things and adapt and come from a place of understanding, especially others, to be able to empower them so that they feel comfortable in conflict as well.
Excellent. I'm going to have you write a chapter for my next book.
I would love to, Kim, honestly.
That was very well said. That was very well said. That's exactly right. And that it's a process. I mean, just invest in learning the skills. And if you don't want to do it, have somebody who can. But just remember that, you know, if you're a manager, or even if you're working beside other people, how you show up is going to impact the whole group.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Really appreciating all of your knowledge that has been imparted on us today, Kim. So one final thought, where can we reach out to you again? What's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, probably, well, I prefer my email, kim@bestconflictsolutions.com. My website is Best Conflict Solutions. So my email and my phone are on there as well.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time today, Kim. Be well.
My pleasure.